Hi, welcome back to Nutrition Bite. My name's Chelsea and today I'll be talking everything gut-brain axis. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Sarah Dash with me today, who's a nutrition scientist and recently been awarded her PhD, so congratulations.
Thank you, I'm very happy to be done.
That's great, and thank you for coming to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
So I guess we'll start off with asking, what's the relationship between our diet and our mental health?
Sure. So I think it's an interesting relationship because we've understood for a long time that what we eat is really important to our physical health.
Yeah.
But I think the scientific research has really lagged behind a little bit in terms of mental health.
Right.
So it's really only within like the last decade or so that the concrete evidence has actually been there to say that what we eat is important to our mood.
Yeah.
So there are lots of studies that have shown us from different countries all around the world and really like all across the age span.
Yeah.
To say that a healthy diet seems to protect our mental health,
Right.
and that eating a poor quality diet seems to be a bit of a risk factor for mental disorders, I think.
Okay, so interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess that perhaps relates to the gut microbiome and our mental health. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So up until now, we haven't really understood how this relationship might be happening biologically. Yeah. So really the question that we've been trying to address in the research now is how exactly does diet exert its effects on mental health? And obviously, as we were saying, the gut microbiome is something that's really fascinating in both like the research and public sphere at the moment. And we think that it might be really important to the brain as well. So I think we intuitively understand that like our gut and brain are connected.
Right.
So for example, if you need to do an interview on camera, you might be feeling nervous and you might have butterflies in your stomach, and that's connected to that feeling of anxiety.
Definitely.
So I
feeling that right now.
Yeah. So I think we know that the gut and brain are connected, but again, it's been really difficult to research in humans in particular. So we're just starting to understand how diet is important to the gut, and then subsequently how that might be important to our brain as well.
So you were part of some amazing research which looked at how diet can improve your mental health and state. Can you talk about the diet that you used and the outcomes of that research?
Sure. So you're referring to the SMILES trial.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which was the very first study in the world to see whether we could actually treat depression by improving people's diets.
Wow.
So up until now, we've really just measured people's diets and then maybe followed them over time and assessed whether they develop depression or things that seem to protect people over time. But we've never actually tried to treat people with depression by changing their diet. So our participants visited a clinical dietitian, which was a really important aspect of our trial. A little plug for dietitians.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and they followed what we call a modified Mediterranean diet over the course of 12 weeks. So the Mediterranean diet is sort of the gold standard. Lots of fruits and vegetables and legumes, nuts, olive oil.
Yeah.
I think this might be really good for the brain as well.
Right.
So participants were randomly allocated either to receive that dietary intervention or they participated in a social support condition.
Right.
So this is really just because we know that people with depression tend to get better simply by visiting somebody, that social interaction. So we have those two groups really just to account for that. So at the end of our study we can say it was the true difference is from receiving the diet. So we measured, of course, everybody's characteristics and their baseline level of depression, and we took a bit of blood work as well, and a really comprehensive overview of their diet. They either received the dietary intervention for 12 weeks or that social support condition, and then we followed them up at 12 weeks and really conducted all of those assessments again. And when we looked at the depression symptoms of the participants, we found that those who received the dietary intervention had a far greater reduction in their depression symptoms compared to the control group.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's the first time we've been able to demonstrate that it might be really important to improve our diet for treatment. I will mention that we didn't take anybody off of their medication. We still think this is a really important treatment as usual, but as an addition, diet seems to be really important and maybe part of treatment for depression.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So is there any indicators that it could be potentially beneficial for other mental illnesses?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's really complicated with microbiome research because it's really only within like fairly recently that we've had the technology, because there are like billions, maybe trillions of bacteria living in our gut, and so it's really difficult to measure. And there are so many different things that might comprise a healthy gut. So it's been hard to say, you know, this is what a healthy gut looks like. If somebody has a mental disorder, this is what their unhealthy gut might look like. It's very complex. So I would say we're in the early stages.
Yeah.
And as part of the work at the Food and Mood Center, which is where I did my PhD, we are starting to look at characteristics of the gut microbiome with, among individuals with depression.
Wow.
Now there is a lot of there's a lot of interesting sort of hypotheses about the relationship between the brain, other psychiatric illnesses, and the gut, particularly surrounding things like allergies or food intolerances or irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
I have to say it's not my area of expertise, but there's a lot of active research going on at the moment, so I think it's really like a watch this space type of answer.
So cool, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess you mentioned that the Mediterranean diet had beneficial effects on mental well-being. So is that something you would recommend for someone to improve their low mood? And if so, how long would they have to be consuming this diet to see effects?
Sure. Well, I would say that the Mediterranean diet is sort of, as I was saying, the gold standard that we have. Although it doesn't seem to matter what type of traditional diet you follow.
Okay.
So there's evidence to support like a Norwegian diet or a Japanese diet. And I think it's because they share sort of the core principles of eat lots of plant foods, eat whole foods, don't exclude certain things, but also really minimizing those processed foods.
Yeah.
So certainly I think a Mediterranean diet is a great way to eat. It's lots of like delicious, fresh, healthy foods. So the clinical dietitian that worked on our trial actually has published a paper that sort of brings together some of the recommendations for the prevention and treatment of depression in terms of diet. And it's really focused on some basic principles like really increasing plant foods, reducing some of those extras, things that don't really contribute anything like lollies or baked goods. Also including healthy fats like fish and olive oil and nuts. So I think that those are like core principles that could really be integrated into everybody's diet.
Yeah, definitely.
Now in terms of like how long you would have to do it, I think it's a hard question because I think like for me anyway, even if you eat a really nice meal that's like nice and healthy, or you made something, got something from your garden, you feel really good after that quite quickly. So I think that's like a really tangible benefit of eating well. Like you can almost feel the effects, and we've all had an unhealthy meal where we kind of regret it pretty quickly. So I think there are those like immediate effects, but I think ultimately it's about making like a sustainable change. So
it's more of a lifestyle.
That's right. Yeah. So gradually sort of swapping out those unhealthy choices for a more whole food or plant-based diet.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I guess speaking about, you know, removing those processed foods or sometimes foods from our diet, is there evidence to suggest that consuming a lot of these foods, like high sugary foods, is linked to a low mood or a poor mental state?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there's quite a bit of research, typically in nutritional psychiatry, this area of research. We tend to characterize diets either by like a traditional dietary pattern, which as I described is more of those whole foods, fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains, a little bit of meat and protein. And then we compare it to more of a Western type of diet, which is like more fast food, far fewer fruits and vegetables. And we certainly see that following a Western type of diet is associated with increased risk of developing depression. Wow. So typically that is higher in like sugars and unhealthy fats. But even just to link the gut microbiome in, we know that following a Western type of diet can be sort of disruptive of that healthy balance of your gut bacteria. And it can also perhaps in some people promote like a leaky gut. So where bacteria escapes from your gut into your bloodstream and sort of provokes that inflammatory response, which is a risk factor for a lot of health problems. So certainly we would say that that unhealthy diet with lots of sugar and unhealthy fats can really be a risk factor for your brain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of our Facebook followers wanted to know whether probiotics are important for your mental health and whether they can make a big difference, so like kombucha, those kind of foods.
Yeah, they're really trendy at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, it's an important question, and I think it's important to sort of look to the scientific literature on these types of things, because we tend to get excited about things that could really help people. So I would say that we still have a lot to learn about probiotics. So there has been some research. It's a lot easier to do on animals rather than humans. There's a few more variables in humans. So I wouldn't say that we have conclusive evidence to suggest that taking a probiotic is going to alleviate all symptoms of depression. It is still really early in the research, but there are problems even just for consumers, like knowing that, you know, what type of bacteria are you taking and how many live bacteria are there and are they living? So there's still a lot of that stuff that needs to get worked out, I think. But in terms of things like fermented foods, I do think it's a great idea to incorporate those as part of like an overall balanced diet.
That's good to know.
Yeah, the only thing I would suggest is just being mindful of added sugars to some of the processed or commercial foods.
That's good to know. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I guess finally, where do you see, you mentioned that we're kind of in the early stages of the research, so where do you see the future direction going, and do you think that diet will be a part of the standard practice to treat mental illness in the future?
Yeah, that's a great and big question as well. I think there's a few things. So I think we have a long way to go in terms of really understanding what's going on in the microbiome. And I think the more we're learning a lot really quickly, so the better we get at interpreting that information, I think it's going to tell us a lot of really valuable information. And I think that might help us even with like personalizing our treatment a little bit. So if we can tell a bit of information about what's going on in the gut, perhaps we can make dietary adjustments or lifestyle adjustments accordingly, or even tailoring treatment plans. But I also think it's really interesting to think about how we can incorporate diet from like a public health perspective, because I really think that prevention is important.
Definitely.
So nutrition education, thinking about how we eat in schools and hospitals and the food environment. That's right. And finally, I think, and I hope that diet will really have a key role in the treatment of mental disorders, whether that is having like a collaborative care environment where dietitians are part of a treatment plan. But there's a few policy changes that I think will be important for that to happen. But so a lot going on.
Definitely.
And some important next steps. But I think diet will be a really important strategy.
Well, that's really exciting as a future dietitian to hear.
You're the future.
Thank you for your time, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to follow our Facebook page and like the video. See ya.